I spent 50 years building a life that turned out to be a house of cards. My name is Margaret. I am 74 years old, and today, I am going to tell you the truth, the kind of truth that burns your throat when you speak it. I never thought my own daughter would be the one to shatter my soul. I never thought the man I shared a bed with for decades would choose our own child to betray me. But standing in my pharmacy back in the late 60s, I believed I had it all. Let's go back to 1968. I was 25, a rare female graduate in a small town that expected women to stay in the kitchen and keep their mouths shut. But I was a pharmacist. I had a degree, a career, and a husband named Walter. Walter was 32, handsome, and owned a fabric store that was the talk of the town. People looked at us and saw the perfect couple. They saw a man building an empire and a woman supporting him. But perfection is often just a mask for the most hideous secrets. Walter used to tell me that a woman's place was in the home, even as he profited from my hard work. I should have seen the red flags then. I should have seen the way he craved power more than he craved me. But I was young, and I was in love with a ghost. We built a mansion, a life of appearances, and we brought a daughter into this world. I thought I was securing her future. I didn't know I was setting the stage for my own execution. Our life looked like a magazine cover. Walter's fabric business didn't just grow, it exploded. He became the man everyone in town wanted to know, and I was the pharmacist who kept the family's reputation spotless. We built a mansion that felt more like a museum than a home, cold, grand, and hollow. But as the house grew, Walter's ego grew with it. He started staying out late, claiming business meetings were keeping him in the city. When he did come home, he looked at me not as a partner, but as an ornament. A woman shouldn't be so focused on her career, Margaret, he'd say, his voice dripping with a newfound arrogance. You have a daughter to raise. You have a house to manage. He wanted me small. He wanted me contained. And then there was our daughter, Linda. I poured everything into her. I wanted her to be strong, to be educated, to be better than the limitations Walter tried to place on me. But Walter? He spoiled her with a poisonous kind of love. He taught her that money could buy silence and that loyalty was something you owed only to him. I remember a specific evening in the summer of '75. I found them in the study, whispering. When I walked in, the silence was so sharp it could have drawn blood. Walter just smoothed his suit and smiled that practiced, salesman smile. Just discussing her future, Margaret, he said. I didn't realize then that her future meant the total destruction of mine. I didn't realize that the man I supported, the man whose business I helped fund with my pharmacy earnings, was already plotting to replace me with the very child I had birthed. The betrayal wasn't a sudden spark, it was a slow-moving fire that I was too busy working to notice. It was a Tuesday in late autumn. The sky was a bruised purple, heavy with the promise of a storm that had been brewing for years. I had come home early from the pharmacy, a rare headache forcing me to leave the counter. The mansion was silent, but it wasn't the peaceful silence I usually cherished. It felt heavy, like the air before a lightning strike. I walked toward the master suite, my footsteps muffled by the thick Persian rugs Walter had insisted on buying to show off our wealth. I heard voices. Whispers. Not the sharp, businesslike tone Walter used with his associates, but something soft. Something intimate. I pushed the door open, and time simply stopped. There was my daughter, Linda, sitting on the edge of the bed. And there was Walter, his hand resting on her stomach with a tenderness he hadn't shown me in a decade. The air left my lungs. I didn't scream. I couldn't. I just stood there, a ghost in my own hallway. Margaret, Walter said. He didn't even jump. He didn't look ashamed. He just looked at me with a cold, detached pity. We were going to tell you. Eventually. Linda wouldn't look at me. She just stared at her lap, her hands shielding her growing belly. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, a lie I could believe just to keep my sanity intact. But the truth was staring back at me. My husband hadn't just betrayed our marriage, he had desecrated our family. "She's pregnant, Margaret," Walter continued, his voice as casual as if he were discussing the price of silk at his store. "It's a boy. An heir. Something you couldn't give me again after all these years." In that moment, the pharmacy degree, the mansion, the perfect reputation, it all turned to ash. I realized that while I was out working, while I was funding Walter's dreams and securing Linda's future, they were building a life together in the shadows of my own home. I wasn't the matriarch of this family. I was the financier of my own replacement. I didn't scream. I didn't throw things. That was the pharmacist in me, trained to handle poison with a steady hand. But inside, every organ was failing. Walter didn't offer an apology, he offered a settlement. He spoke about discretion and moving on as if he were negotiating a lease, not the end of a 30-year marriage. "You'll have the pharmacy," he said, his voice as flat as the marble floors beneath us. "But the house, the reputation, those stay with the family. With the heir." He called our daughter the family, and in that one sentence, I was erased. I left that night. I didn't pack the fine china or the expensive paintings I had curated. I took my books, my degree, and the few clothes that didn't feel like they belonged to Walter's wife. As I drove down the long, oak-lined driveway of the mansion, I looked in the rearview mirror. The lights were still on in the master suite. They weren't mourning my departure, they were finally beginning the life they had been practicing in the dark. I moved into a small apartment above the pharmacy. The walls were thin, and the smell of antiseptic became my only companion. The town talked, of course. In a small town, a scandal like this is better than the weather. I saw the whispers in the grocery store. I felt the pitying looks from my regular customers. "Poor Margaret," they'd say, while secretly wondering how a daughter could do that to her mother. But the hardest part wasn't the town's gossip. It was the silence from Linda. My own flesh and blood never called. No apology. No explanation. It was as if I had been a ghost long before I actually left. I spent my nights staring at the ceiling, wondering where I had gone wrong. Had I worked too hard? Had I been too cold? But every time I reached for a reason, I came back to the same terrifying truth. Some people are simply born with a hunger that no amount of love can satisfy. Walter had the mansion. Linda had the baby. And I had the pills, the powders, and... The seasons in Palm Beach don't change much, but the years do. I stayed in that small apartment, working behind the glass of the pharmacy counter, watching the world move on while I was frozen in time. The news of the birth reached me not through a phone call, but through the gossip of a delivery driver. "A boy," he said, not knowing he was twisting a knife in my chest. "Walter is over the moon. Named him August." August. A grand name for a child born from a grand betrayal. I spent that night staring at a faded photograph of Linda when she was 5, the day I bought her her first bicycle. I looked at her innocent smile and tried to find the monster she had become. But there was no monster in the photo, only the ghost of a daughter I had lost long before she ever met Walter's greed. For years, I heard fragments of their life. Walter's business flourished, fueled by the image of the reformed family man and his young, devoted wife. They attended the galas, they hosted the charity events. My own daughter became the lady of the mansion I had decorated. Every time I saw their names in the local paper, I felt a physical nausea. I never reached out. I never sent a card. Some might call it pride, but I called it survival. You cannot heal in the same environment that made you sick. But as August grew, so did the rumors. People said he didn't look like Walter. They said he had a quiet, studious nature that didn't fit the loud, flashy world his parents had built. I would stand at my window at night, looking toward the hill where the mansion sat, wondering if that little boy knew he was living in a house built on his grandmother's tears. I thought I would die in that apartment, forgotten and bitter. I had accepted that my story would end with a period, not a comma. But life has a strange way of bringing back what was stolen, often in a form you never expected. 20 years is a long time to live as a ghost. I had aged, my hands now mapped with the blue veins of time, still dispensing medicine to a town that had finally stopped whispering. I thought the past was buried under the weight of those 2 decades. Until the day a young man walked into my pharmacy. He didn't look like Walter. He didn't have that shark-like, predatory grin. He had soft eyes I recognized from my own reflection. He stood at the counter, fidgeting with a medical textbook, looking at me with a curiosity that made my heart stutter. "Can I help you, young man?" I asked, my voice professional but thin. "I think you're Margaret," he said softly. He didn't call me ma'am. He didn't call me grandmother. He just said my name like it was a sacred word he'd been practicing in secret. "My name is August." The bottle of aspirin in my hand nearly hit the floor. August. The heir. The boy born from the ruins of my life. He was a man now, a medical student with the same passion for healing that had once defined me. He told me the truth of the mansion. It wasn't a palace, it was a prison of cold gold. Walter and Linda's perfect marriage was a theater of resentment. They had everything, yet they had nothing. August grew up hearing stories of the bitter woman who abandoned them, but as he grew, he started seeing the cracks in his parents' lies. He found my old medical journals hidden in the attic, the ones Walter hadn't managed to burn. "I wanted to know the woman who wrote these notes," August whispered. "I wanted to know the person who actually built this family's foundation." I looked at him, this boy who was the living proof of my betrayal, and for the first time in 20 years, the stone in my chest began to crack. He wasn't Walter's triumph. He was my continuation. He had chosen the path of a healer, not a salesman. In that small, sterile pharmacy, the legacy Walter tried to steal from me was being handed back by the very person they thought would. Walter thought he had one when he took my mansion. Linda thought she had one when she took my husband. They spent decades building a life of appearances, a fortress of silk and gold to hide the rot inside. But as I sat in my small apartment, watching August graduate from medical school, I realized that time is the ultimate judge. Walter is an old man now, living in a house that smells of dust and regret. His business is still there, but his heir doesn't want it. August didn't want the fabric empire built on lies, he wanted the pharmacy journals filled with truth. When Walter found out that August was visiting me, he tried to cut him off. He threatened to take away the inheritance, the cars, the luxury. But August just looked at him with those soft eyes, my eyes, and said, "You can keep the money, Dad. I've already found something more valuable." Forgiveness is a strange thing. It doesn't mean that what they did was okay. It doesn't mean the scars on my heart have vanished. I still remember that Tuesday in autumn, I still remember the cold corridor. But I chose to forgive, not for them, but for me. I chose to stop letting their poison dictate my pulse. Today, August and I work together. We talk about medicine, about the future, and about the quiet strength it takes to stay kind in a cruel world. My daughter, Linda, remains a stranger, a shadow in a big house. I pray for her, not as a mother, but as a human who knows how heavy the soul becomes when it's fueled by greed. If you are watching this, and you are standing in the middle of your own storm, if someone you loved has betrayed you, or if you feel like your world has turned to ash, remember this: the sun does not ask for permission to rise. Your life is not defined by the people who tried to break you, it is defined by how you put yourself back together. I am Margaret. I am 74 years old. I lost a mansion, a husband, and a daughter. But in the end, I found my soul, my grandson, and a peace that no amount of gold could.